big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
Preseason for the Bears is almost in the books. I thought that first drive against the Buffalo Bills was more encouraging than a lot of people expected. Obviously, perspective's everything, because people are going to sit there and say, well, Caleb Williams, it's just preseason, blah, 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 all this type of stuff. But hey, the Bears are showing us that maybe, just maybe, they have a formula for offense that's suddenly working. Welcome into the Halas Beat, brought to you by the Bear Report. Usayd, Koshul, Steve, Letizia here. Check us out on Twitter at Usayd, Koshul, at CFC Bears, and at Halas Beat. Steve, I don't know about you, but suddenly there's, I guess, these two different sides of Bears Twitter, because you're either like, hey, I'm hyped up for the 2025 season, but then there's also the, hey, shut up, guys, it's literally just preseason.
Yeah, I think it's a delicate balance you got to take with that, because both sides are right. It is only preseason, and we shouldn't be, making wild conclusions from, a couple preseason games from what Caleb Williams played, like 10 snaps or whatever it was. So yeah, I think it's a little of both. We shouldn't be forming these, strong opinions, but I'd also be much rather be talking about how good the Bears looked, and talking about that, rather than going back and saying, oh, it's only preseason, they might have looked bad, but it's only preseason, it'll get better. No worries there. Because we've done that plenty of times. We've done the opposite plenty of times, but in the grand scheme of things, like I said, it's better to be talking about how good they looked than making excuses for how bad they looked.
Yeah, and I think it's this sort of weird dynamic here that the Bears have suddenly found themselves in, because we heard all these reports about, especially the first, I want to say, I think I lost track here, but it was like, the first week or 2 weeks of training camp, about how it was the offense this, the offense that, the defense is doing real well. And then there's the whole like, hey, we've seen this story a million times before. And I don't think anyone was necessarily counting out Caleb Williams or Ben Johnson. But any win, I think, is a good win in a sense. And that first drive you look at in this Buffalo game, it was really critical to see how Caleb Williams connected with his receivers so much, which if you look at the game, he started 4 for 4, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't looked at the game book. I know you've looked at some of the All-22, but he started 4 for 4, so that's the first thing. The second thing is the 4 for 4 was 4 passes, 4 completions to Cole Kmet and Colson Loveland, which just sort of goes to show that, just because you have 12 personnel and 2 tight ends on the field doesn't mean the Bears are always going to run the ball.
Yeah, that first drive was pretty much the best case scenario, for the Bears. 4 completions, to 4 different receivers too. So Loveland caught one, Kmet caught one, DJ Moore caught one, and then Zacchaeus caught the end of the touchdown throw. So it's nice to see them spreading the ball around a little bit. It's nice to see Caleb. That first drive he was calm. He was efficient. Everything was just very crisp. Even the passes, that he threw, they were completions, but they were right on the money. There was the guys were able to catch it in stride and just keep running. Like the touchdown to Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus did a lot of work on that. Don't get me wrong, but he caught it. He caught it in a position where he could, where he could get that run after the catch and do what he could do, which is exactly what you want. Ben Johnson talked about it too, just the fact that they were getting in and out of the huddle quickly. They were getting up to the line of scrimmage. There was no one kind of questioning where they're supposed to be. There was, Caleb Williams was commanding the offense. He was calling out protections. He was doing all the different stuff. There was no false starts. I believe there was actually one holding penalty, but it was a little ticky-tack on Drew Dahlman. And they actually overcame that holding penalty pretty easily. So besides that one penalty, it was very, very smooth all around in that first possession. So it was really good to see. The second possession, was a little, just not as crisp. I thought Caleb Williams was still fine. He was only 1 of 4 on that second possession, but he had one which was a sniffed out screen that was never going anywhere, and he actually smartly just spiked it instead of trying to make something. He had one drop by Romodunze. It wasn't the best throw. I think even if you asked Caleb, he needs to put that a little bit better, but it's also a throw that Romodunze needs to catch. And then there was another play that was just doomed from the start that was, scrambling for his life there. So it wasn't as crisp as a team, but it didn't do anything, at least in my opinion, to take away from that first drive. I think overall, even taking both drives into consideration, I think overall was a pretty crisp day for the starters.
Yeah, and you start to kind of, I think, focus in here on Caleb Williams and his play in general, and you kind of already mentioned it. We're used to seeing... See, I think it's interesting because if you go back and you look at the last, 3.5 to 4 years, I'm going to say, of Caleb Williams, the dynamic there is really weird because you went from being Jalen Hurts backup at Oklahoma, and I'm going as far back as OU for a reason, but he went from being, Jalen Hurts or I think Spencer Rattler's backup at Oklahoma to being the starter at USC after Lincoln Riley got the gig at USC. And then Lincoln Riley, I remember when the Bears went ahead and drafted Caleb Williams, Lincoln Riley kind of told the local media, hey, have fun with him, guys. And he was, I think, really leaving the door open for all the possibilities that exist with Caleb Williams. And I think that because if you look at Caleb Williams in 2023, and then you look at him in 2024, and you look at him in parts of 22 as well, 22 to 23 is a completely different player. And it's simply because, as well as 2024, compared to what we're seeing in 2025. So you're seeing a player that I think has really matured a lot more than people are going to give him credit for. And ultimately, the reason that you see a different Caleb Williams this year is because it's to your point, the one, I believe it was screen pass that he had where he tried to go to, I think it was DJ Moore, or I don't even think NFL GSIS, which is the official media outlet, the portal, even figured out who the ball was being thrown to. I mean, he kind of just spiked it, just says pass incomplete short left. But see, in those instances, 22, 23, and 24, Caleb Williams would have tried to consistently dance around and try and make something work. 2025, Caleb Williams is coming in and is significantly playing slower, still has a bit of that aggressive mentality, but is also willing to go ahead and is also really willing to be much sort of smarter with the football, which I think really translates to this entire conversation of just the mass amount of growth that exists, where the growth is not always what is being reported at practice. Sometimes it's the little things that, we necessarily aren't going to think about, but the Bears are thinking about.
Yeah, just playing smarter. And I think, all of his plays that he made on Sunday came from the pocket, and he's always been a better pocket passer than was given credit for. He was a better pocket passer at USC than he was given credit for in the draft process. He was a better pocket passer than he was last year that he's always given credit for, because you see with Caleb Williams, you always see those Superman plays where he escapes pressure, a sack, and scrambles out and then chucks the ball 50 yards downfield for a completion. You always see those, and people kind of overlook how he is as a pocket passer. But there were definitely some areas where he could improve there, just with his timing and rhythm, from last year, from when he was in college. That's definitely the case. So it was nice to see all of his plays this week just coming from the pocket, just hitting his back foot and firing, no hesitation. He wasn't, confused where to go. The big play to Komet was probably, the play that was all over Twitter the most, just because it was the longest completion. But I actually thought his best throw of the day was on that second possession, his one completion on the second possession to DJ Moore, because he threw it was a little bit of a timing route, but he threw with anticipation. He started his windup before DJ Moore got out of his break. The defensive back was playing inside leverage, which for people who don't know, that means he's playing on the inside shoulder of the receiver. He knew DJ Moore was running an out-breaking route, so they had a really just nice, easy pitch and catch. It was only for 10 yards, but the fact that he just hit his back foot and threw it before DJ Moore actually got into his break was just really nice to see. It was a perfectly thrown ball. It wasn't as highlight worthy as some of the others, but I thought it was kind of what showed the growth and maturity from Caleb Williams as a passer, maybe even the most. So everything was really, really encouraging from Caleb. We're going to talk a little bit about what we want to see for next week, but I hope he's given the opportunity to kind of build off that a little bit.
I mean, dude, before we get to next week, there's a lot of, trade, I guess, chatter is what you want to call it, that is suddenly taken the Bears Twitter world by storm, because everyone is sitting here and is saying, okay, the Bears need a running back. The Bears need a running back. I know that some people are looking at Brian Robinson Jr. being a guy that could possibly be a fit. The Bears have the draft capital to make it work. Full disclosure, Steve and I are not going to start the, hey, should the Bears trade for Brian Robinson and Trey Hendrickson Jr. or Brian Robinson or Trey Hendrickson Jr.? Just because I think that, well, you guys know us well enough to know which trade we take if it all came down to it. But Brian Robinson Jr., dude, it's weird, right? Because the Commanders are one of those teams to where, I mean, they kind of ended the Bears season last year, and you look at it this year, and they seem to, be dealing with the whole Terry McLaurin fallout. B-Rob's a guy that has always been a pretty solid player over the last 3 years, averaging, a little under 800 yards, but has shown to be a pretty solid receiver. I see some of the David Montgomery comps being an Alabama guy as well. I don't know if, he makes sense for the Bears, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a conversation that takes place.
Yeah, there'll probably be a conversation that takes place. I mean, look, Brian Robinson is most likely getting traded. He and the Commanders came to a mutual decision not to play in the last preseason game, basically for that reason. Is they know he's not going to be a Washington Commander, so he's most likely going to get traded, potentially even cut if they can't find a trade partner, because they've had some younger running backs kind of cement themselves, play well in the preseason. The Commanders don't necessarily want to give Brian Robinson a new contract. He is a free agent after this year. So it does seem like he is trending towards getting traded. Now, are the Bears going to be interested is another question. I do like you said, you should at least make the call. Anytime a running back becomes available, the Bears should do their due diligence, make a call, see what it takes to get them. But Brian Robinson doesn't really move the needle for me, too much. I don't think he's a player that you trade a pick for. I don't think they'd necessarily have to give him a contract right away, but if you trade a pick for him, you probably would want to give him a contract, extend him past just 1 year. My guy, Tom Cavanaugh on Twitter, big Bears fan on Twitter. I forget what his ad is, but you should follow him. He said, Brian Robinson is like the Honda Civic of running backs, which I think is just perfect because, he's reliable, he's solid, but he's not really a guy who really moves the needle at all for you. He's not a guy who's going to he really elevates the position group. So in my mind, I don't see it really making sense trading for a guy like that. I think we talked a little bit about like the Kenneth Walker trade, a month ago, 2 months ago. I don't think he's going to get traded, but that is the type of running back that I think is more of like a game changer, that if you trade for, he can really, open up the offense for you. I don't view Brian Robinson the same way. I view Brian Robinson as just an okay guy. So, if it's a super late round pick, I'm not going to be upset about it by any means, but it's just not something that I would do. In my mind, the Bears need to hold on to those, day 3 picks. Poles has been kind of too liberal with trading away those day 3 picks for guys who aren't very good. And you need those picks to kind of, solidify the bottom of your roster. They give you flexibility. So in my mind, it's not something I would do. Again, I'm not going to be too upset if they trade a late round pick for him, but I don't see him as really a guy that's much better than what they have. I think you could turn Roshan Johnson into something. I think, DeAndre Swift, for all his faults, can still be good on third downs. And I think at this point, I'd rather just see what Kyle Monangai can give you, see what you have with him before making a trade for a guy that like Brian Robinson.
Well, and that's a good point, because if you're Washington right now, so just for some perspective, right? So you've got guys like Demetric Felton, who that's to everyone here, that's former Chicago Bears, 2-time, I think, practice squad member Demetric Felton. You got Austin Eckler there. Jeremy McNichols is there as well, who was shockingly also on the Bears practice squad back in 2019. So it kind of becomes this weird situation, right? To where, well, what do you do? And then it took Corey Krosky Merritt, by the way, this year as well. So they have running backs. I think that, when right now it's kind of a power struggle, and the reason being is because it's like Cliff Kingsbury's offense has never really been known as the type of offense that's going to feature two really good running backs to begin with. We never saw it in Arizona. Certainly was not a thing at USC, which, let's call it how it is. Lincoln Riley was running the show at USC. And then you look at Washington as well. I mean, they paid Austin Eckler a hefty amount of money last year in order to go ahead and to basically have that sort of every down back. And so it starts to become this real complicated situation where if you're the Bears, I think, like you said, you pick the phone up and you start to say, all right, where specifically do we go ahead and we start these negotiations? If it's a 5th or a 6th rounder, I'd want it to be a 6th round pick with conditions potentially, like a 5th rounder that, or a 6th rounder that could turn into a 5th rounder. Let's say if he scores 7 or 8 touchdowns, got it. If not, you trade it for a 6th round pick. And the reason being is because, Robinson Jr. is the type of running back to the point where it's like, if you look at the production right there over the last, 3 seasons, I think it's fair to argue that you could, with a fully healthy Kyle Monengai and an offense that's clicking, you could easily have a 7th round running back that's an 800-yard rusher / 400-yard receiver as a running back.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Robinson, he's never had a 1,000-yard season, and he had 223 carries last year. So like that's enough rushing attempts to have a 1,000-yard season. He didn't do it. His best season was at 4.2 yards per carry. His PFF grade has gone down every year the last 3 years. He's never averaged more than 3 yards after contact per attempt. Those are numbers that paint the picture of a guy who's he gets what the offensive line gets him, and maybe a little bit more than that. So Kyle Monengai can get what the offensive line gets you. Roschon Johnson can get what the offensive line gets you. Even DeAndre Swift can just get what the offensive line gets you. And with DeAndre Swift, he's a guy who wasn't very good last year, but the offensive line was also not very good. If you can get DeAndre Swift to the 2nd or 3rd level, he has some talent there. It's just getting him there. And I think the Bears are going to do a better job that just by scheming up their run game a little bit better, having a better offensive line in general is going to help the running backs. So I don't think this is not a guy that you necessarily trade for. Like you said, if it's a conditional pick like that, yeah, sure, no problem. Like, get some more guys in here. The Bears definitely have to make a move at running back because Roschon Johnson's been banged up. Kyle Monengai got banged up in practice last week. Deion Hankins got hurt in the game last week. It looked pretty bad. So they're down 3 running backs already. So they need to make some sort of move. But I think at this point you can bring a guy off the street. At this point in this game, in the offseason, I want to see who's available at final cut downs because there might be another guy that you like who gets cut, who maybe isn't as good as Brian Robinson, maybe it's a slight step below, but you get him free. And like I said, I think there's a 0% chance that Brian Robinson gets cut just based on everything that's getting reported. Like, there was a mutual decision by both the Commanders and Brian Robinson not to play in that preseason game. That's not a good place to be if you're the Commanders. Like, you're kind of running out of a little bit of leverage there. So it's possible he gets cut. I know they really love Jacory Krosky-Merritt in Washington. Like, he's kind of the reason that they're shopping Brian Robinson because they think he's kind of the real deal. Like I said, they have Austin Eckler, they have Jeremy McNichols, Chris Rodriguez has had a good preseason. They have about 4 or 5 guys. Like, I think they'll be fine without Brian Robinson. He could potentially get cut. I bet he gets traded for a late round pick at some point. But there might be other guys who get cut too, after final cut downs, and you might be able to bring in a guy who can be serviceable and get you tough yards and early do some early down work while DeAndre Swift takes the 3rd down work. I don't really see that being an issue. There will be someone available.
I mean, it's definitely going to be one of those things worth watching. I got to ask you here, dude. We've been in camp for about a month now. It'll be about a month this Friday. Friday night just so happens to mark the Bears' last preseason game, which, side note, I got stuff for football, so I'm not going to be able to watch it, this is the one preseason game a year that I miss. There's a lot to sort of digest here going into this 3rd game because the Bears are saying the starters are going to play. We're not really sure how much they're going to play, similar to week 2. It'd be good for them to get a little bit of reps here just so you can kind of continue to build on this positive momentum. But then the other, I think, really important part of this whole thing comes down to what is this team going to do, just in the sense of what we expect kind of based on what we've seen in training camp and then moving forward as well.
Yeah, I think that does seem like the Bears starters are going to play. So what I want to see is, a couple things. One, I want to see them, like you said, build off the momentum that they had in week 2. The offense is probably the starting offense is actually probably all starters are probably only going to play a drive, I would guess. They played 2 last week. I bet they played just 1 this next week. But I want to see them build off that momentum that they kind of had. I want to see. Weirdly, I want to see Caleb Williams, as much as possible. I want to see them run the ball a little bit better, at least with the starting lineup in. As great as Caleb Williams looked and the passing game looked, the running game really didn't look that great. So I want to see them do that. It's going to be interesting to see who the starting left tackle is for that game, because whoever comes out with the starters in week 3 of the preseason is probably going to be your starter week 1. It's looking like it's Braxton Jones, but maybe it's Theo Benedict. I thought both of them kind of had up and down games in week 2. So there's a lot, just from the offense. I want to see what Ben Johnson, does. Maybe does he do anything a little bit different, or does he keep it still pretty vanilla, because it's still preseason. So there's a lot to kind of still watch. I thought some guys, who played well last week, I want to see them build off it. Obviously Austin Booker kind of continued his trend. He didn't have as many sacks as he had in week 1, but I thought he played equally as well in week 2. I thought Luke Newman played really well on the offensive line. He got his shot with the starters because Joe Thuney was just sitting out because he's a vet. I thought he played really well, so I want to see him kind of build off that. If you could kind of steal an backup interior offensive lineman in the 6th round, I think that's really important. So there's still a lot to watch. There's still a lot of things up in the air. Another thing that is with the defensive back rooms. We've talked about it a lot this preseason, where the cornerback specifically, is a position that we thought they had great depth, and we really like that group. Well, Terrell Smith looks like he's probably going to be out for the year. We still haven't even seen Zay Frazier. We don't even know what's up with him. So that DB room's starting to look a little thin. Jalen Johnson's still out. That DB room's still starting to look a little thin, which is odd at this point, because kind of where we started the offseason. So, we need to see some guys step up there. So far, really haven't. I want to see Tyreek Stevenson just kind of do something. Hopefully he gets some run a little bit more. So there's still a lot to watch, and still a lot kind of up in the air in this preseason that, I think we'll get some final answers in week 3. But mostly, what final answers will come just based on when and where guys play, because I think by week 3 in the preseason, your depth, the Bears depth chart, maybe not the one that they put out to the public, but the coaching depth chart is going to be pretty much locked in at that point. So it'll be interesting to kind of see who plays and when.
Well, I should mention, Jalen Johnson did do some work on the field pregame this past Sunday night, so that is a little bit of good news. It's just the issues. We've never seen him practice in this scheme. So when he gets back, there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve that he has to kind of go through as well. But see, I will say this, though. To your point about Terrell Smith and Zay Frazier. First off, the Zay Frazier rumors that sort of broke on Twitter a couple of days ago, where people thought that he was retiring, those were not confirmed at this point. So everything's been radio silent on that. I do think it's important to understand, though, that there's something serious going on with Zay Frazier here, because usually the Bears are kind of say something, but they haven't said anything. It's been radio silent. Terrell Smith's a name that obviously, the Bears are awaiting some sort of confirmation on. Hopefully it's not as serious as people make it out to be. And the other big thing, is you talked about Austin Booker and Dominique Robinson being out and them being injured in this preseason week 2 game as well. How does that contribute to all of a sudden who steps up there? Because the Bears are already thin at some spots on defense. I'm not saying that they were razor thin at edge rusher, but you saw the high upside with Austin Booker, and now we're not sure how long he's going to be out. So now that pushes the possibility of, do you think that this team, going into the final wave of cuts decides, hey, we're going to bring in a veteran edge rusher that maybe hits the market. Not a guy that's going to get you 15 to 20 sacks a year, but I could, maybe get you 20, 30 pressures the whole season, get you 3 to 5 sacks maybe. Just a guy that is going to be serviceable enough to the point where the Bears feel really good about him essentially being a solid, third or fourth edge rusher.
Yeah, that's a really good point. With them kind of going out, like it could potentially lead them to that. And I think, if there's one position where there are guys that, some vets who can still kind of give you something, it's probably edge rusher. I mean, Zadarius Smith is still out there and is a free agent. So he's a guy that I've had circled for a while. I think if you do have any concerns about Dominic Robbins or Austin Booker missing time, he's a guy that I think you could potentially bring in. I think he's been kind of waiting for an opportunity. He's definitely a good enough player to be signed right now, but it's kind of one of those situations where he's a vet. He doesn't want to necessarily go through the rigors of training camp and all this stuff. He also wants to go to a team where he knows he can get requisite playing time. So he wants to see if there's any injuries before signing with anyone. So I think that makes sense. He's got to complete that NFC North tour. He's played for the Lions. He's played for the Packers. He's played for the Vikings. Bring him into Chicago, see what he can do. If, they have any concerns about Austin Booker or Dominic Robinson. But Austin Booker has played well enough where I think he's kind of earned that the right to be that third pass rusher. But it wouldn't surprise me if they bring in another guy there as well. And then, like I said, like we talked about earlier, they could definitely bring someone in at running back if anyone's cut or if there's a vet that they like. I think, DBs, those three positions, they could definitely bring in someone either after cut downs or a vet who maybe hasn't signed yet, is just kind of waiting for the right position.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely this, I think, really weird dynamic here because to me, another major storyline to kind of watch in this game is I'm looking to see what this team is going to go ahead and do in terms of more 12 personnel. Because, the first play of the preseason game, it was obviously, I think, a big play action fake to Colson Loveland. Hits him for a pretty big gain. I think it was like 8 yards or something. Now, I want to see the Bears continue to kind of unleash Colson Loveland, but obviously I don't think Ben Johnson's going to go full throttle on Kansas City. I do think it's going to be one of those where what's going to happen is he'll end up basically, giving Colson Loveland a little bit more playing time. I also would not be surprised to see if Luther Burden's the guy that they experiment with just in and around, and the reason being is because the big thing with a guy like a Luther Burden is that he can be that really versatile chess piece, and so you want to see what he's able to do in the preseason, because when you get to the regular season and you start game planning, one of the major questions is ultimately going to be, well, can Luther Burden make guys like DJ Moore more expendable than people believe?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Luther Burden. I don't know how we got almost 28 minutes into this recording without bringing up probably the guy who was most impressive in week 2. Because, Luther Burden, I want to see what he can do to kind of, as a encore to his week 2, because he played really well. Not only was making plays in the pass game, but, man, he was just blocking his ass off. He was doing the dirty work that Ben Johnson wants. And I don't think I tweeted this out, but I looked it up. Pretty much every play before Luther Burden had a target, he had a really nice block, pretty much exclusively. So I think that was Ben Johnson kind of trying to hammer home that message to him, and probably to everyone on the roster, not just Luther Burden, but DJ Moore, Ramudunze, that that they'll block, don't rock. He's been saying it, and he kind of designed it in a way where they had a run play with Luther Burden making kind of a difficult block. He came through, and then the next play he was getting a target. After his big block on the goal line, he got 3 of the next 5 targets. So that was really nice to see. So I'm glad you brought him up. So I want to see exactly what is he going to do to kind of build off that. I think Zacchaeus too. We talked about him last week, kind of being a key piece here. And obviously he showed it on his one reception, making a big play there. So, are they going to do a lot of 12 personnel? Or are they going to, they have these 2 slot receivers that are all playing 3 slot receivers, really, if you count DJ Moore. who are all playing really well, and all are going to need targets. So it's going to be interesting to see. We probably won't really know next week, but once we get into the season, how they distribute all these targets, because we have about 5 or 6 guys who need the ball in their hands. So it'll be very interesting.
I mean, it's like Ben Johnson says, no block, no rock, which I can tell you right now is a philosophy that has to be adapted at every high school level. Because it's like, I think it was, do you remember, was it Brandon Marshall when he was with the Bears, or it was the Dolphins, right? And he was asked to get out there and run block on a play, and all he did was stand around. I believe Jay Cutler was caught doing that as well. So those are the moments where when Ben Johnson says no block, no rock, that's kind of what I shouldn't even say kind of, that is what he's alluding to. Anyways, we hit the 30-minute mark, guys. We're going to get out of here. Like I said, I had a little bit of a scheduling mix-up this week, which is why we are dropping this thing we record on Tuesday instead of we originally said Thursday for a Friday morning release. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Usayd Koshul, at CFC Bears. Check out at Halas Beat on Twitter as well. If you're watching us on YouTube, guys, give us a 5-star rating and review. Make sure that you drop a like, comment, subscribe on the video. If you're listening to us on podcast, 5-star rating and review is really appreciated. We are going to go ahead and I promise go with the Thursday going into Friday morning recordings starting next week, August 28th. You guys are going to kind of hear from us then. Enjoy the game this Friday and everything the Bears have to offer. When the third preseason game's in the books, that also means the wave of roster cuts is soon to be coming. So stay tuned, because the next episode is going to be all about that. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, bear down and have a great rest of your week.